Hello again, YouTube. In the first episode of this series on the origin of the hooked cross, or swastika, Fulford, Kamadion, Kolovrat 1, whatever name one prefers for it, I mentioned I want to take a detour every now and then to look at seemingly unrelated subjects. I consider these as clues describing the circumstances in which swastika appears. And often I find these circumstances as well or similar in many places, more or less distant from each other. That is what we saw as well in the last episode, in which I pointed to the similarities we find in the creation myth of early Indian people and Norse and Slavic mythology, for example. We saw how the swastika symbolizes the cooperation of different or even opposite forces in creation, forces that are indicated in the mythology as gods and demons, as well as symbolize the happiness invoked by the newlywed women and man, etc. This detour will offer a brief look at anthills and serpents and another auspicious symbol, namely the umbrella. Like I mentioned before at the end of part 6.2 of the swastika series, Vishnu is in deep meditation and an anthill has grown around the deity. It is actually a termite hill, but the termites are simply called white ants. The same storyline repeats with variations depending on the region, with termites building their mound around the deity as if he were a tree or a pole, and most sources speak of a rishi rather than a deity. The rishi or sage is named Valmiki, very similar to the Sanskrit word for anthill, Valmika. He is variable with other rishis. It will be the deity Kamanedu in the avatar of the Holy Cow Mother, who will feed the deity or sage trapped in the anthill. Searching around on the net, I eventually found a lot of sources talking about the worship of anthills, and this is not just in India alone. Also, Southeast Asia knows several legends outside of the Hindu or Buddhist doctrine in which the insects and the mounds are connected to ancestral magic. But in archaic religions of Africa, Oceania, and Mesoamerica as well, anthills were given special status, and to this day some of these old traditions are still alive in some form or another. It was after reading a very informative article published in 1982 by a man named John C. Irwin, which gives us a summary of the Hindu and Tamil traditions of anthill worship. After reading that, I decided to snoop around a bit more, and I finally made this summary of the traces I could find to share. According to his research, there is enough evidence to assume this practice dates back to the first millennium BC at least, and was practiced all over India in the old days. During the rituals taking place on nearly every important occasion of life, such as birth, weddings, sickness, etc., the worshippers circle sunwise around the anthill, offerings like milk and butter are poured on it as oblations. There is a connection with death as well, as it is believed that anthills lead to the netherworld, where the ancestors reside. The anthill is sometimes evoked as a divine witness or as an oracle, and it is believed to cancel the debt of repentance if they embrace the hill. Newlyweds chase each other around the hill sometimes, taking a piece of it with them to their new home. And on the occasion of building of temples as well, a piece of the hill will be taken and buried into the foundations, like an embryo of the deity. Um, some researchers point out how these anthills were often the model to which many temples have been shaped. And there are numerous examples which could substantiate this claim. Some like this here, Tiruverumbur temple, have shrines resembling anthills as the avatar of, in this case, Shiva. Other temples are built in the vicinity of such a hill, like in Periapalayam, excuse me for the pronunciation, around which shelter is built. There are more examples of this kind of practice. But the stepped pyramids of the Igbo in Nigeria are also meant to represent anthills dedicated to the earth goddess, with the anthill being a representation of her clitoris. Other myths from other areas around the world will present them to be the lingam of a supreme deity, however. Again, it makes me wonder when and what caused the ancients to genderize these objects of worship, and also, is there a connection to the mounds that were built in the Mississippi plains, where the symbol of the snake is present as well? In one of the West African myths, there is talk of a deity sitting on an anthill, as the land around it is flooded. Very soon after I started researching, I was intrigued enough to dig deeper. One cannot wonder why there seems to be so much similarity in the stories surrounding these hills, the fortresses of ants and termites. Initially, the termite mound was not a representation or avatar of a deity, but it was the very deity on itself. Nowadays, often the anthills have been totally replaced by a temple with an anthropomorph goddess figure to receive the offerings. In other places, it is not the hill nor the goddess that is worshipped, but the Naga who resides in the abandoned anthills. Naga means cobra. These snakes look for shelter and make their homes in the formicaries, since insects are excellent engineers who know how to build perfect air conditioning. Important for now is the connection between a snake and a primordial mound. Just like in the verses of the churning of the ocean of milk, like I mentioned in the last video, part 6.2. So the mound is brought in connection with the primordial mud, emerging from the primordial waters. Both emblems which belong to the archaic mythology. It was mainly connected to the sun rather than the polar-directed Mount Meru, residence of the gods. The primordial mud appearing above the water would soon be green after so-called fertilization by the sun. It would take me too long to go into details on the various aspects which the writer describes in the publication. He looks at different propositions involving reincarnation, argumentations on the natural or cosmic nature of the king snake in connection with primordial mound of anthill worship. Within the field of the archaeomythology, most of the symbolism is explained through astronomical occurrences, and although I recognize the principle of as above so below, I would like to stress that it is not necessarily always a top-down influence, meaning the dragon or snake used in symbology during antiquity does not need to be explained with astronomical cycles or even plasma configurations. Myths start just as well on the ground level, based on extraordinary impactive events, but also day-to-day activities or encounters, and based on that which they observed from an animistic viewpoint. mystery worth retelling occurred all around them as they recognized life forces in a multitude of manifestations. And those things which the moderners seem which to moderners they would seem self-evident or even potty and dull. I do not necessarily disagree with theories based on cosmogony, since comets, bright lightnings, auroras, or incoming meteors, etc., were indeed recorded in mythology, but the explanation given would reflect that which is known to ancient man. Ants and snakes, they knew, and the mystery they presented had a lot to do with the particularities in the snake's behavior and the recognition of its powerful poison. Especially cobras, aka nagas, like I said, they prefer the abandoned anthills, and they are also mentioned in the Vishnu Purana, for example, where the sage Narada descends into Patala, the underworld, or netherworld, like I said, where the naga or snakes reside. Narada describes Patala as more beautiful than Svarga, heaven, filled with splendid jewels, beauty, and sweetness. The soil here is white, black, purple, sandy, yellow, stony, and also of gold. What this last myth tells us is not just a fabrication based on nothing but the feverish dreams of a sadhu on a bed of nails. Prospectors of the mining industry know very well to pay attention to the contents of termite mounds. The content of the mounds are a good indicator for ore, since the busy bugs go meters and meters deep underground to gather minerals and move them around. Vegetable material is transported down, minerals are brought up to end embedded in the walls of their formicary, which is just a smart word for anthill. In the notes, Irwin refers to a custom by which mud of the termite hill is grinded and used as a medicine. He then compares this custom with an ancient Chinese tradition by which jade was grinded and consumed for longevity and in order to better preserve a corpse. Shamans of the Mesoamerican Pueblo Indians used the pebbles from an anthill to make their rattles. The earth of the hill is to this day used for making ceramics, but also the hill in a whole are useful as perfect kilns due to the termite architecture making the perfectly vented castle residence of their queen. These kilns have been used by Indian hunter-gatherers millennia ago, not only for the making of ceramics, but also for metallurgy, and not just in India, by the way, also in Africa. Some Indian lore regard the inner sanctum of the hill as a residence of the fire-breathing snake. It has been proposed more than once that stupas are actually modeled after the mounds as well. The writer, points out that the connection between this primordial mound and termites is not at all strange when one considers the fact that termites have been around for 300 million years. He describes the connection to the primordial water with the ability of termites to go find water reservoirs as deep as 40 meters, allowing them to thrive in arid conditions. Vedic texts offer us a reference to healing powers of this water. Indian myth also connects the snake with primordial water and with rainbows. Indra uses his bow to slay the snake that guards the entrance of the mound or stone in which a treasure is hidden, the bow being nothing other than a rainbow. the combination of archaic images like the snake, rainbow, treasure, and a primordial mountain is one that seems to be present in many cultures in one way or another. I'm going to close off here for now, but obviously this is not the end of the story. Thank you all for watching, and keep an eye out for part 2, which should be ready very soon. Bye bye.